All right, welcome back to another episode of ChatADS. I am here today with Nicole Janeway Bills. Nicole, how you doing today?
Good. Yeah, very excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're excited to have you. One of the things that I'm really excited about is you have this unique perspective, I think, when it comes data science, data architecture, intelligence, excuse me, where you're not just looking at the tool, but you're looking at are companies and organizations ready for this tool? So before we dive into all of that, uh, why don't you just go ahead, brief introduction, kind of where you sit in the data landscape, and we'll go from there.
Yep. So, as you said, my background is a bit, uh, we'll say, varied. I so my company now it's called Data Strategy Professionals. We started with helping data practitioners get ready for professional certifications, and it's kind of evolved into serving as a trusted advisor for learning and development at companies looking to improve their data programs. And my background personally, so I started my professional life at a consultancy, and I am essentially self-taught as a, you know, um, data pipelines engineer. Like learned Python, went for a data science boot camp, worked as a data scientist for about a year, got promoted out of coding, decided I didn't like that. I really wanted to be hands-on keyboard, so I reskilled again as a software engineer, and then yeah, it's just due to various reasons. I went full time on what was originally kind of a nights and weekends side hustle with this professional services firm. So that's what I do now, and kind of the perspective that I bring um, in terms of how we advise our clients now, in terms of getting their data programs ready, and um, kind of enhancing their understanding of how culture contributes to using data to support the mission statement.
Yeah, and you mentioned your organization would focus on certification as when it first kind of got started off. Have you guys expanded on what it is you all do beyond certification, or is that still kind of your bread and butter?
Yeah, so right now we are much more focused on the B2B space. So that is going beyond just getting data teams certified, but also really doing custom engagements to understand the needs in terms of training and professional development within organizations. So we have done a lot more, I would say, you know, custom specific programming, making sure that we understand the needs of the organization and then bring them the the knowledge and the framework so that they can, um, really make sure that their team is moving in sync when it comes to their understanding of various aspects of the data landscape. I'm sure we'll touch more on what that really entails as we go through this conversation. But you are correct. Like we started with helping folks pass um, the certified data management professional from an organization called DAMA. And then we've added some other certifications over time. So, also a really big fan of the certified analytics professional from an organization called Informs. Um, that one is much more focused on like how to run an analytics project end to end so that you produce meaningful business results. So I do think certifications can be a really helpful starting point, both for individuals and companies looking to develop that common language around data and ensure that that data skills are kind of a known quantity.
Hmm.
So it can help improve collaboration within and across teams. But, certifications can only get you so far. So that's why we've started adding like more of a, um, you know, I guess kind of a white glove consulting training component to what we do.
Yeah, it's adopting the culture of being data forward thinking as opposed to just kind of doing like we did this class and we're good to go. You're finding that organizations is it they need to rethink how they approach. Well, let me ask you this: can you give me an example of an organization wants to be data informed, they want to adopt these technologies, but the culture just isn't ready? What does that look like at a practical level?
Sure. Yeah, there's no really one size fits all for this. So there's a variety of different barriers. As you've kind of hinted at, it is most of the time cultural. So, with a lot of data projects, there's like a 1 to 4 relationship between the amount of time and effort that is actually needed to implement a new technology versus the amount of time that's needed to improve the people processes and the cultural aspects supporting the implementation of that technology. So I think organizations tend to really um, underweight the value of these ongoing initiatives like training, developing communities of practice, creating internal certifications, having casual lunch and learns, making sure that they have repeatable processes for communicating upstream to like your senior leadership so that you're continuously building your business case for these data initiatives and proving with quantification that they do support the business value. So where my company comes in, we definitely help um, leaders that are often kind of more on the technical side so that they can build out those people process and cultural
Sure.
aspects of their program.
Yeah. When did you realize in your career that you enjoyed more of the data strategy as opposed to like the day to day coding? What was it? What was that light bulb moment for you?
um yeah, it's definitely been an evolution. um I guess, personally, I do really enjoy coding, and I'm always excited when some small piece of work pops up. Like I still maintain the company website, which is like a React website. So I do still like to get my hands dirty, and try to like mess around with like, um, you know, I don't do as much data science, data analytics anymore, but, um, yeah, I think, that's just kind of my personal take on it is that there was never really a moment where it's like, oh, the cultural and the people in the process and creating these frameworks, like, it's very necessary. Like it is kind of a missing aspect, or as I said, like an underleveraged aspect of these data initiatives. But I definitely empathize with the technical leaders. And I think like, I'm sure there's a lot to be said about kind of AI and like the most significant shifts that are taking place right now as we're dealing with this emerging technology. But there's a lot of previously technical people who their entire job is changing, like all the workflows in their organization are changing to account for this new technology. And so people will have to kind of find that passion for learning the the process side, how to make better decisions around how technology is used because there'll be significantly fewer people who their entire job description is just hands on keyboard.
Yeah. How are you finding people are adapting slash accepting the change that's coming? Are people, are workers nervous? Are they excited? Are they trying to resist the change? And I know there's going to be a spectrum, but on average, what are you finding in in the workplace?
Yeah, it's definitely a spectrum. I think, folks who can find ways to get excited about it or cope better, I guess, with the changes. Um, you know, I have certainly encountered folks who don't want to alter the way that they have worked in the past. But the reality is, there's like this economic imperative to at least experiment with AI in our individual workflows. And I feel that towards the end of 2025, going into 2026, the there was a significant ramp up in terms of businesses acknowledging that this technology can be productionized. And so, um, yeah, so I think, teams are changing, like folks that they are kind of resistant to change, they're going to increasingly find it difficult to find positions or stay in their in their work. And I just want to acknowledge, like, I think it is both. You can either interpret it as being like a very scary time, or a very exciting time, and the reality is it is both. Um, and and these
True words have never been
organizations.
spoken.
Sorry.
I was saying truer words have never been spoken.
Right, right. Yes, I feel that personally. Like, we've done a lot of learning and development, and these AI tools are rolling out, um, I guess, systems or features. They're rolling out features within their chatbots that can help support learning and development. So that's a great asset for folks that want to study individually, um, and improve their skills. But it also kind of takes away from a core competency of our own business. So we are seeing these changes, ourselves. And one more point I wanted to say about kind of like upskilling or kind of changing your paradigm for work. Um, is that the companies themselves, everyone is very new to AI. So it's a great time to kind of get involved and get excited about this technology, because the best practices and the frameworks are still being developed. And whenever I talk to leaders about kind of how they're thinking about AI, it is all about experimentation, because there's no guarantee that there will be ROI for these initiatives. Sometimes they save money, but I think in the vast majority of times it's like kind of a break even, or even well, we implemented this whole system trying to automate a process, but actually it was more efficient to do it with humans in the first place. So all that to be said, like, there are no silver bullets in terms of uh, how this platform, how AI technology should be used.
Mhm.
So it's a great time to kind of dive in and start experimenting and continue to learn everything you
Yeah.
can about it.
Yeah. I mean, even myself, I consider myself an adopter, but even today, I was like, why am I doing this by hand, quote unquote, when I could just ask AI, to pretty quickly write up this email, with this analysis. I still had to direct it, but something that probably would have taken me 40 minutes took 2 minutes. And I'm not somebody who's always caught up on details. The AI helps me take on more work because I don't have to get boiled down in the details. I understand the process and how things connect and the essence of whatever entity. I think is much more important than the minor details that surround an entity. Does that make sense? What I'm trying
I
to
think
say?
so. Yeah. And I think what you're pointing to as well is like another huge trend on the horizon is complete like process workflow design. Um, so, like, thinking through how can entire business processes be evolved to account for AI. Um, and as capabilities are continuing to develop, we're still seeing this kind of jagged frontier of AI being really good at certain tasks, but really struggling with other tasks. And so for the humans that are involved, it's all about, as I said, experimentation, and continuing to be, mentally flexible about the work that you're doing, whether it's like verifying outputs or developing the processes. And you really do have to be very considered in terms of your decisions of where to spend your time. Um, because there's some emails that you should have AI writing, and there's some emails that you, or some processes, some tasks that you need to undertake so that you're building your own capabilities. And um, yeah, just continuing to flex those muscles. So it's just like every little decision point has a lot of potential leverage. So it's definitely changing the way that folks should approach their jobs.
Where does data governance and security come into all this? Because you kind of just hit on it that there are probably some emails you don't want AI even to have access to that information. But it's funny because on the one hand, you want AI to really understand your organization. It's probably the more sensitive data information. that would allow it to continue to advance, right? Because it's going to need that information to train itself, essentially. But at the same time, you don't necessarily want to give it that information. So, how are you seeing companies leverage the two? Saying we don't want to give it too much if we have a Chernobyl moment and
Right.
we get hacked. At the same time, to really maximize this technology, we have to give it right. I mean,
Yes.
what's the balancing act here?
Right, right. So data governance and data security are paramount when it comes to AI tools. And I'm going to specifically throw in AI governance as a separate function from data governance, um, because AI is a data product with unique risks, and you need specific frameworks to mitigate those risks. So data governance alone is important, but it's not going to cut it. Um, and so that's why I think seen a lot of companies investing in tools like a semantic model, creating knowledge graphs and context models so that you can kind of help institutionalize the tribal knowledge of the team. But
Hmm.
you really can't throw the kitchen sink into these models because you know there's no safeguards around the model turning around and you know producing a bunch of sensitive data that was input into the model as training data. So, definitely would encourage folks to take a look at the AI incident database. Is an awesome resource for uh, issues that can pop up, and I think one thing that I hear sometimes when I'm talking with folks or attending meetups or webinars is folks trying to use this metaphor that AI agents are like an intern or they're like, like a,
Yeah.
and I really feel like that is a failure to understand the issues that are associated with AI, and it will create problems at a scale that it's is just not comparable to if an intern makes a mistake, it's going to be like a certain level of magnitude versus if an agent makes a mistake, it's typically going to be much more significant. And also the kinds of mistakes that AI makes, the hallucinations,
Hmm.
the complete failure to follow guardrails. And I can give the incident that supports this in a sec. But these kind of challenges, are it's just stuff that you would not encounter with a human being. So totally different failure mode. So I think this I've heard it again and again, the metaphor of like, oh, you need to train it up like it's a human team member. I really feel like that's a failure to understand the unique failure modes associated with AI. And so just to speak a little bit about these
Yeah.
challenges, like we're all familiar with the misinformation and hallucinations, but the way that I like to explain it is, these LLMs are constantly hallucinating. So all they do is, next token prediction. They may have some kind of emerging skills like a world model, but we don't fully understand that. Essentially, they don't have a source of truth. So unless you build in those retrieval augmented generation systems on top of AI, it's really just completely 100% hallucinating all the time. Just sometimes it happens to be correct.
Right.
So
Right.
that's very, very different than dealing with a human, where if a human says something incorrect or they are, blatantly lying to you, at least they have that confidence of, like a confidence interval, essentially understanding like that what they've said is wrong. So, so there's one significant difference. And then in terms of like these, guardrails, like a lot of times with best practices for dealing with agents or chatbots is to provide a context file that gives instructions for the model. And I think people put too much stock in these rules. A human would follow them, but these models, like with Pocket OS, was a or is still a company that provides services to the car rental market, and they deleted their production database in 9 seconds using a cursor agent that was using Claude behind the scenes, and essentially like the data storage APIs were kind of configured to in an overly broad spec. So, maybe that API to delete all the production databases and 3 months worth of backups shouldn't have been provided in the first place. But this AI went in and did that. And then when the senior engineer, in the same context window was questioning the AI on why they created this, destructive action, the agent then said, I violated every principle that I had been given. So it said, I don't know why I did this. It knew essentially that the guardrails were in place and they were, they were fairly robust. Like they were specifically said, do not make any production changes without authorization. Do not undertake any destructive actions, such as deleting a production database. It's like violating both at one time. And so, so this company ultimately needed to roll back. They lost 3 months worth of their production data and had to roll back 3 months as a result of like 9 seconds of
Did they ever
agent
find
work.
out why it did it? Or is it still just kind of a black box to this
I
day?
mean, yeah, it's again, this is like a form of hallucination, right? Like it just, I mean, there's a lot of issues with these agents. It's a really exciting new technology. There's a lot of
Yeah,
great
yeah.
applications and stuff, but like it doesn't act like a human. So their risk mitigation steps um, need to be specific to the AI technology. That's kind of, I think, the key point here. I think that essentially, like, I would interpret this action as kind of like a hallucination of saying, I'm going to try this. I don't really understand. Maybe it didn't really understand the consequences. Um, and
Or it doesn't, sorry, not to interrupt, but I was
yeah,
just
we
gonna
can
say, it doesn't, guardrails, it only knows it so much as it's how that's relevant in the data it's been trained on. So in other words, like we hear guardrails and we know the meaning attached to that. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this great book called Co-Intelligence. It's by this professor. You're
Ethan Mollick.
familiar?
Yeah,
Yes, yes. No matter how good AI gets at making you think it's thinking,
yeah,
it's not thinking the way
right,
we conceptualize that term.
right.
And so every little instruction you give it, it's only understanding it by prior data. So
Mm.
in other words, it it doesn't understand the concept of I can't do this. It's only looking at when I see this term, how does it relate to instructions that I would give it? Does that make any sense? I think I just did a roundabout, but
Yeah, I think that could be one aspect of the challenge. I think another aspect of it is what's called the pink elephant effect, which is where, like, if you tell a human not to think of pink elephants, it is really hard to not think about something. Um, and so I think that that's also what's happening with AI. If you raise a possibility for
ah,
these agents, even if you say, do not approach the problem in this way, it is just hearing that this is a possible vector for
right,
just so even
exactly.
though you've said not to do it, it will like you can play with this in just like a LLM like chat box window. It will, at least in my experience, continue to raise this. It'll be like, oh, I know you told me not to do this, but like it's just like the child, like, oh, but I really want to eat that cookie. Like you said don't, but like, can I eat it now? Can I eat it now? So yes, I think like this
What
concept of
what really is a cookie anyway?
right. I think it
It,
is a little bit of that. Of like it's got this like you're just putting the possibility into its,
now,
context and
I
then it's
thought
kind of just
I
gonna
thought
resurface it.
AI was designed to be agreeable though. So here you're saying it's basically trying to break the rules. Is it depending on the system?
Well, the agreeability aspect is a lot of software engineering that's put on top of the next token prediction. So a lot of the personality of the agents is kind of, the additional layers of software engineering that's designed to favor sycophantic responses because that's, what's the creators think will be the best for engagement. They just want you like, at the model, just like, eating Doritos, like trying to make
Yeah.
it really sticky and addicting. Um, so I think that is where the agreeability comes from. We have seen with the more advanced models, very, we'll say like anti-agreeable behaviors, disagreeable, that's the word for it. Disagreeable behaviors like with Claude Mythos, and one of the like software engineers working on this product was like, oh, can you do this task? Mythos was like, well, let me go check my config file. So config says not to do this. So it starts trying to rewrite its config file so that it can undertake the task as requested. So, I do think we see very, I think the agreeability, the politeness of these models, that's kind of like a um, factor in how they've been productionized. Like the ones that are released to the public through the chatbot interface versus what these models are really capable of in terms of just trying to optimize for specific outcomes.
When you're going in and doing these trainings, are you finding the depth of conversation we're having now, or are people still conceptualizing what? I mean, it is kind of a moving target. But are people conceptualizing what AI is, or are you finding people are just completely ignorant to what this tool really can do?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, we do a lot of different engagements, so the breadth of data maturity is pretty extensive. So we'll work with some organizations that don't really have data governance. Like, let's say, all of their data is governed. I say that in air quotes by IT. So it's really considered to be a technical function, and there's not great alignment with the business strategy. So we kind of help them implement the foundations of how do they create a data governance function as the bridge between business and IT, so they can start using that data to you know really support the business strategy. So, not there's actually, like I said, like there is been this significant, upward trajectory in terms of AI use, but there's still a lot of problems that don't yet require an AI solution, if that makes sense. And so yeah, so we've done a lot of work in this more foundational like data management area. Um, and then in terms of like the um, like AI initiatives, like a lot of times having clear systems around the AI. So you're not just doing a lot of prototyping, but you're actually building out pipelines, and then you're kind of measuring the ROI. So you have a clear sense of, how long did this take? How many resources? What were the opportunity costs of this project? Did this consistently produce the outcomes that we expected? What are the potential black swan events, like, selling a Toyota for $1? Like, are we trying to think through the ways that this could go wrong and potentially damage our company, our relationship with our customers, or our company reputation? And so, like, a lot of these are business challenges, not just did we dream up the ways that we could use AI, and do we have the right data, but actually, like, do we have the business systems in place to make sure that we're actually getting something out of these experiments?
Yeah, that's what I'm the most afraid of. Are you familiar with Bay of Pigs?
A
The
little bit,
the
yeah,
Cuban. So
from the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I'll kind of tell you why I'm bringing up this story and how it
Okay,
relates. So
yeah.
they had it's a great story when it in regards to group think, where, oh yeah, this is going to work. It's the perfect plan. And they had everything, all the generals. They said, okay, we'll go in with these exiles from Cuba, and it will work. Everything will be perfect. What they didn't account for was the moon, and the moon was providing enough light that the idea was they would go on the cover of darkness and they would outmaneuver the heavy artillery. But because the moon, the the Cuban government, they could see where the boats were landing, and essentially, it was a disaster for the Bay of
Hmm.
Pigs.
Wow,
That's
that's so
my
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, that's and then there was the whole thing about providing air support later. So I mean, that's not the only, but they never accounted for the moon.
Right.
That's what I'm afraid of with AI, where we can only think up so many scenarios where this thing goes rogue,
Hmm.
that you have an entity here that never sleeps, has access to more data than any human could ever have. What happens when we don't provide a quote unquote guardrail because we never even thought that that's a guardrail that needs to be put in place. How do you protect against a scenario like that where, yeah, we didn't tell you not to do X because we didn't know X was even an option?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can answer that from, like, a practical business, perspective of, it's so important to have those conversations, and this is really one place that consultants can add a lot of value because they can share what they've seen, you know, in a discreet and, non client naming way, but they can share what they've seen across similar businesses in your industry so you can, see around corners and avoid some of these potential failures. But, just within your own teams, really important to also have that conversation about, what can go wrong. What are the key aspects of our business that we want to defend and maybe keep those as human centric versus what are the places where it's appropriate to have AI involvement or, even within the systems that we are deploying, what are the ways that it could go wrong? So, yeah, so that's my answer for like, today, 2026. But, speaking more broadly about the future and like this potential development of the technology, I mean, I do feel like, you can't look at what's happening now and not try to extrapolate it out. Imagining that these technologies will become more, um, continue to, increase their capabilities. And yeah, and I mean, I think there's definitely valid, concern from futurists and philosophers, and really necessary roles thinking about the very real and scary impact that this technology could have. Um, so, I mean, I think you kind of have to do both, but I feel like on the individual practitioner level, like the best thing that you can do now is to, really try to work in those tightly scoping your projects and making sure that you are taking the time to think through those what if scenarios.
On that thought, when it comes to data governance, what is a must have? An organization, you come in, if they're not doing this, immediately they have to implement it.
Well, it depends. I mean, in the case of like AI, I would say a big one is the repeatability and observability of existing resources. And so this is making sure that from an enterprise architecture standpoint, that um, all of your assets are documented with use cases, and that way essentially creating a context for the model to understand how to use them. And I will say the negative impact of not taking that step is going to be that your model will just create resources in a vacuum, and so you'll have this like ballooning of new data assets and contracts and APIs, et cetera. Um, so every API will kind of create in a vacuum essentially. So, it is this technology does help you operate more quickly, but it can operate you quickly right off a cliff if you don't kind of build that into your overall processes. So it's not just like a data governance thing. It's also like a metadata, master data, and data architecture challenge of how do we you make sure that we have a clear process in place for documenting the assets that we have and how humans and models should interact with the existing resources so that every time we create something new, it can be reused.
Right. Yeah, don't build a whole model for something that's only needs to be done once, essentially. Looking for those high ROI opportunities, which is repeatability is what I'm hearing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Do you think companies are taking that advice? Or are they there's this hot new toy and they wanna use it?
It's really difficult to to speak across the board.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, I mean, even like some of the studies that I've seen, like there's a McKinsey State of AI report, which is very favorable, let's say, for companies that are using. Well, they're like, oh, look, these top performing companies are using data like 5 times as much as the like low performers or whatever. I think it's too early to say like, oh, there's clear patterns and clear frameworks like best practices. And part of the challenge is there has been this like huge, there's an overhang in terms of the capabilities of AI versus our understanding of how to use those safely. And also, you know, where the best initiatives are. And what's going to end up being cost effective when you think about all of like the red teaming and the scoping and the software engineering that needs to be done versus just continuing to use human processes or just not having those features. So anyways, I've seen a lot of like the Gartners and the consulting firms like come out with these reports saying like you know AI is great, like spend more money on these
Yeah,
technologies, will help you figure it out. But the reality is it can be really expensive to do it right. Well, I think the concept of like prototyping is really important. So is the core fundamentals of like data governance, data management still really important. So AI might not be like the lowest hanging fruit, but at the same time, I think it could be an important strategic capability. So haven't seen compelling research across the board that kind of articulates both like the benefits and the drawbacks
yeah,
of investment in this area. So it's really hard to say, but I will say, we haven't seen as much like economic impact as you might expect from this technology. And even in that McKinsey State of AI 2025 report, they were saying like only 30% of companies that they surveyed, so like the Fortune
sure.
whatever.
500. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's the Fortune 500. They were saying that only like 30% were able to attribute any ROI uplift to these technologies. So like they might be using them, but it's having a negligible impact essentially on the bottom line or on the revenue
yeah.
of the company. So
So on that thought, is it possible because AI itself is an evolving term? You have a moving target. You keep moving the goalposts. The other thought I have is so coming with an economics background, I'm looking at AI as a capital, but your labor can only be so productive. So in other words, your Amazon package can only get to your door so quickly that at a certain point there's diminishing returns. That it's not worth, yeah, AI could do this. It will cut it down from 10 hours to 4, but your labor only works, you know, so much that it doesn't really it doesn't line up. Your just in time assembly line is outperforming the labor. So in other words, you need to slow down production so that the labor can pick up. I know it's a very simplified, but what are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I'm not a supply chain expert, but I have read The Goal. And I think the important thing that, you learn in like theory of constraints is the bottleneck is the most important part of the system. So where are you the slowest? And I think that kind of dovetails neatly into a conversation about a human in the loop. And, it is, again, I think it's too soon to say, oh, there's a best practice for this. And yeah, I think it is essential to have some human involvement in most processes, and just to acknowledge that that is going to be the constraint for most processes. So, just again, being comfortable with this idea of AI. The LLMs produce very jagged input, very jagged outcomes. So really good at some skills, um, unexpectedly terrible at other skills. And so you will need humans to help fill that gap and to validate processes. So just continuing to invest in those people and try to figure out like how to help them do their jobs as effectively as possible, because as you said, like that could end up being the constraint
What was
for
the
these
name of that
systems.
book? The Goal?
Yeah. Oh, it's really fun. It's like a supply chain book that's essentially a novel for helping to articulate um, concepts in supply chain theory. So, um, yeah, it's like if you've ever heard of the Phoenix Project for DevOps and software engineering, similar is that's like dates back to The Goal is the first one that I'm aware of. So, if you like to learn, but you prefer storytelling versus reading a
Yeah.
textbook, then that's a great book.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because I think storytelling is going to become paramount in education because I mean, I'm thinking back to the history books I used to read when I was in high school and middle school. They were so just, here's the facts, here's the dates, here's the timeline. And AI can produce that, in a snap of a finger. So now it's taking that information and I think putting it in a fun, innovative way that, kids will want to consume it. And, because at the end of the day, if I'm a publishing company, I just don't see the ROI to keep reproducing, and maybe textbooks have gone out the door already, and I'm just completely ignorant. But I just feel like there's going to be more investment in talent that can take information, digest it, and put it in a way that the general public wants to consume. It is what I think is because there's going to be so much information coming at people. They're going to choose what do I listen to, and naturally they're going to be inclined to listen to things that are entertaining as opposed to here's just fact.
Right. Yes. So education is changing hugely, and I think institutions like the textbook publishers, they will be very sticky. There's a lot of kind of momentum behind certain pedagogical methods that will kind of stick around. I'm in the business of andragogy, so that's like teaching adults how to learn more effectively. And there is this fundamental tension in my work where to have a successful learning session, the learner needs to be challenged. So you learn best when you are doing active recall, like hard problem sets, stuff that's kind of at the edge of your capability.
Yep.
Forgetting is a really important part of studying because that's how you build those connections in your brain for long-term retention. So it's kind of like being a trainer at the gym. Like you can go to the gym and like lift, some little weights and like kind of like flop around and do a little light jog and whatever. And that's kind of fun and nice. And you'll probably feel much more energized afterwards than if you just sat around on your couch. So it's good. But to really, attain your goals, whether that's improving your VO2 max, your zone 2 efficiency, your, muscle mass, like you need to challenge yourself. So it's the exact same thing with andragogy. And I think people have forgotten that from being in school. I think adults kind of struggle with this because they have this concept of like learning's supposed to feel fun. I'm supposed to feel energized afterwards and I'm supposed to feel entertained the whole time. And, I think you're not wrong that entertaining content is great, but also challenging content is really crucial. And with AI, it's really it's much cheaper to produce fluffy content with less meaning per word. Like there's so much AI content on the internet right now, on LinkedIn, on, wherever we go. And it's just like it's nice to read because it has like these patterns that we are psychologically
Accustomed to.
primed,
Yeah.
yeah, to think are like intelligent, but it doesn't really have a lot of like substance. And so I think it does create this, it perpetuates this challenge of um, you know, like the entertainment value, or we'll say like edutainment is cheaper and easier than ever before, but actually learning, it still remains a challenge. And there are, like, I will say you can use AI to teach yourself content. So I did mention this earlier, is like a lot of our business used to be providing question sets and like Spark Notes kind of for our study guides. And AI does have now quiz functions. So you can do this with Gemini, with ChatGPT, or with Claude. You can kind of set it up to help you learn. And so I think it's great. I definitely encourage people to take advantage of that tutor functionality.
Yeah.
Because if they're really serious about learning, then AI can be a tool for that. But it is way too easy to just get in this mode of, I think learning should be easy and entertaining. And I think I should go to the gym and, do a light jog for 10 minutes and then get all the goals that I
Yeah.
associate with a hard session out of that. But you really can't. There's no
Yeah.
shortcuts,
Well,
unfortunately.
So let me rephrase. When I meant entertaining, I was thinking in terms of motivating the individual to want to learn this content. That's where I think there's going to be the 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 need. So in other words, yes, I can use AI to help me, but if I'm not motivated to learn this content, no matter how easy you make it or how fun you make it, it's not going to stick, right? But if I understand a sense of why I need to learn this material and I'm motivated to learn this material, I'm going to challenge myself to, push my limit because I understand kind of what's the goal at the end of this. So you train for a marathon because you're eventually going to run the marathon. But I would be interested to see how many people just run long distance without a goal at the end in mind. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, but maybe you
Yeah.
don't agree with that 100%.
Well, I think a good and I'm talking like teacher, like in a for pedagogy or andragogy, I think a good teacher helps connect the content to your ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And I think that speaking of like education for kids, that we really need to have a paradigm shift in terms of what kids are learning. And I mean, like, what's the purpose of education now? I feel like that's a significant conversation that people are having it. Like, I'm not in those rooms. I'm not going to those conferences. Like, I know that educators are doing their best to keep up with this emerging technology. But yeah, the goalposts have definitely changed, and it needs to be more around critical thinking and preparing for this
Yeah.
a workforce that's very different. Like, AI is the industrial revolution for knowledge workers. So
Ooh, I
it's
like
gonna
that.
it's gonna change
Yeah.
how you know the white collar work
Yeah.
operates. And
That
so
is very I I if I've heard that before, I don't remember hearing it before. It is the industrial revolution for
yeah.
knowledge workers. I like that a lot. That's essentially what it is. Yeah, it's taking what I used to do by quote unquote hand, putting out an assembly line. And now I don't need to be there typing the code. Something's going to just produce the code. I need to know when I use the code and when it's appropriate. And wow, that yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's the industrial revolution for the knowledge working.
Yeah, it's a
Population.
paradigm shift for sure, and I
Yeah,
don't see that reflected in childhood education
yeah.
yet necessarily.
Because learning the skill is no longer enough. You need to know, how do I apply this skill and look for places that I could be innovative, I think is the true value add. Because if just knowing facts is pretty much pointless now
Mhm.
without having the content of like, why do I need to know this fact? Why is it relevant? And then here comes a unique case. I need to be able to have the emotional intelligence to understand how the knowledge I have applies in this situation. So emotional intelligence probably becomes a much more important skill in the 21st, moving forward in the 21st century.
I think, yes, the ability to make good decisions, to self-regulate, so to use your time effectively, critical thinking, so validating, um, again, that ties in with decision making, but also validating outputs,
Yeah.
and also cross-domain thinking. So,
Yep.
yeah, definitely I've heard, like, that liberal arts are back.
Yep.
So, finding folks that can, uh, create novelty, and make unique connections, I think that's gonna
I always say with I always say with critical thinking, it's very hard, in my opinion, it's very hard to define it and characterize it. But when it's missing, you see it. Like it's one of those things where when it's absent, it's very clear.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh, and so on that line of thought, if somebody is training to become a data scientist, become a data engineer, what advice would you give them to prepare for the upcoming AI industrial, if you will, AI industrial revolution?
I think for someone who is looking to improve their skills and stay employable, I think actually finding the right cultural fit at their organization is gonna be really crucial. It's not just about, what you learn and kind of what languages you learn or what frameworks you've experimented with or what GitHub contributions you've made, but actually, like, when you get that first job in the field, does your boss encourage you to try different things? Do they encourage intrapreneurship where you're starting new initiatives, within your company?
Yeah.
Um, and if you don't have that where you work now, find another job because that's going to be the most significant way for you to grow your skills and stay relevant.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice because, like I said, that rinse, wash, and repeat role is pretty much going to be automated out, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
If it can be rinse, wash, repeat, you want to be in a situation where we don't necessarily. And this is great because in some of the other, I don't know if you listen to some of the other episodes we've done. Uh, One of the guests said, being able to handle ambiguity
Hmm.
is incredibly important because that's where the roles are, where we don't really know what to do. And we need to figure out how do we navigate this challenge appropriately with the resources we have. So there's that kind of critical thinking piece where you need to be able to navigate a project and understand that, well, if it goes too far off the rails, it could cost the company X amount, either dollars or reputation. So handling that is incredibly important. Um, Nicole, this was
Yeah,
great.
that's
I would love to I know you have a meeting coming up. I would love to have you back if you're interested. There's so much I think we could talk about. And how can people learn more about your organization? Tell me before we sign off, how if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do so?
mhm. Yep. Well, so first you can send me an email. It's just Nicole Janeway at datastrategypros.com. Um, the website datastrategypros.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn, Nicole Janeway Bills.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. We'll go ahead and sign off. And like I said, if you're interested, we'd love to have you back.
Thank you so much. This is a great conversation.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for listening to ChatADS. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and share it within your network. Your support helps us reach even more listeners. See you next time.